A quick warning before we begin. This series contains descriptions of sexual violence and could be upsetting for some people. So please keep this in mind when listening. This is Brittas Bay in County Wicklow.
I'm just ready to bawl my eyes out here. It's so sad to be here. To think that this is the last place where she was alive is it's very emotional.
It's taken Bernie and Kathleen, Elizabeth Plunkett's sisters, almost 50 years to come here.
It's surreal to be back here. There was a day like today that Elizabeth left home to come here in 76 for it all to go terribly wrong, you know.
Bernie and Kathleen are at McDaniel's pub, the last place Elizabeth was seen alive, on August 28, 1976. It's only now, after all these years, that they feel able to come here to honour Elizabeth's memory in this place.
No matter how many years go by, it's never the same, and she's still only 23 years of age in our minds. Because we're mothers now, we feel responsible for her. We'd never ever wanted to mention the word Brittas Bay. We couldn't even say it.
I'm Ros Purcell from RTE Documentary on One. This is Stolen Sister. Episode 2, Missing.
That weekend in Brittas Bay, the place was buzzing with people from everywhere.
Nicky Crennan was a Garda stationed in Wicklow Garda Station. It was around 10:30pm on Saturday, the 28th of August 1976, when Elizabeth Plunkett had left McDaniel's pub in Brittas Bay. And Nicky Crennan remembers that weekend.
McDaniel's pub would be busting at the seams. The hotel, which is not there any longer, Rockfield Hotel, was only half a mile away from it. And there was a dance there that night as well for the weekend.
There was a lot of people around, but I'm wondering, did Elizabeth go left or right?
Standing outside McDaniel's pub, Bernie and Kathleen are trying to understand what their sister might have been thinking when she was last seen alive.
Was she going to come back to Dublin? Was she going to wait at the caravan? I know if I had a row, I'd go outside and I'd huff and puff outside and I'd light a smoke and I'd go back in. It's such a beautiful rural place, you'd think you'd be as safe as anything.
Elizabeth was seen leaving the pub, and we know this by statements taken by Gardaí at the time.
I remember Saturday night, the 28th of August 1976. I left home with my husband, Albert Green.
Mary Ann Green lived near Brittas Bay, and her son was working in McDaniel's pub that night. After 11pm, she drove with her husband to McDaniel's pub and saw Elizabeth on the road.
We'd only just parked the car when I saw a girl coming from the direction of the pub.
Mary Ann's statement, like all the statements in this episode, is being read by an actor.
She passed in front of our car and came down the steps onto the rough surface on my left-hand side. This girl looked about 18 or 19 years, slim build and medium height, fairly brownish complexion. The girl passed by our car on the left-hand side and passed behind other cars on my left. I don't know which way she went after that. She was wearing white slacks and a t-shirt. The t-shirt was white and a dark colour. The word Saint-Tropez was on the front in dark letters, either black or dark blue. I passed a comment to my husband. It's getting good when they are putting saints' names on t-shirts.
That distinctive Saint-Tropez t-shirt Mary Ann saw was the one Elizabeth's boyfriend Damien described her buying when she was on holidays the month before.
When she left, she was wearing a dark navy blue jumper with the word Saint-Tropez in white lettering across the entire breast. White jeans with stitched pockets at the rear, navy sandals with wedge-shaped heels, silver watch, wearing small imitation pearl earrings.
Damien had had that argument with his friend Joe, and Joe remembered how it was quickly dealt with after Elizabeth left the pub.
About 5 minutes after Elizabeth walked away from us in McDaniel's, Damien and I went out to Damien's car. We both leaned on the side of the car and made up our dispute about the motor car that was the cause of the argument between me and Damien. After a couple of minutes, not more than 10 minutes, Damien and I went into the pub and looked around for Elizabeth. We got a bit alarmed and I noticed that Damien was getting a bit worried.
And now Damien started to look everywhere for Elizabeth. He went to find his sister Mella.
Damien came to me and he said, do you know where Liz is? And I said, no. He said, will you have a look in the ladies' toilets and see if she's in there? So I went in and I said, came out and I said, no, she's not in there. So he says, well, she's gone. He says, she's disappeared. I don't know where she is. So we immediately went out and started looking for her.
But out on the roads, in the dark night, Elizabeth had no chance against two men with bad intentions.
There's all sorts of things happening in Brittas Bay, so they fitted in nicely in a lot of ways, you know.
They, the two men Garda Nicky Crennan is talking about, were John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans, who had fled England from rape charges, come to Ireland and spent a year in prison for various robberies. They were now driving on the Wicklow country roads.
We drove down to Brittas Bay. We turned left onto the seafront road. We were going towards McDaniel's pub.
A man called David James MacDonald was driving in the same area at the time and later gave a statement to Gardaí.
About 200 yards at the Wicklow side of Staunton's supermarket. Coming towards me, I saw a girl walking on her right-hand side. This girl had her head tilted down and appeared to cover her eyes with her hand, as if to shield them from the glare of my headlights. She had black hair to her shoulders, and she was wearing a blue t-shirt and white slacks. After passing her by, I drove to the roundabout beyond the beach club and turned around and came back again. I then saw the girl again, and she seemed to have moved about 50 yards. The girl was walking slow enough and was definitely not drunk or stumbling.
It was around this time that Shaw and Evans also noticed Elizabeth.
We saw the girl thumbing a lift.
She was walking down towards Arklow. Jeffrey said, she'll do.
The two men had a tactic they used to get women into their car.
They were a double act.
They were hunting.
Yeah.
They were out hunting.
Yeah. They're predatory.
Shaw would get out of the car as one man driving looked less threatening.
We passed her out and Jeffrey stopped. I got out and he turned the car and went back and picked up the girl.
Without knowing what he was seeing, David James MacDonald saw the scene unfold before him.
Just as I passed the girl, I saw a car approaching. The car seemed to slow down. As I passed by, I could see the rear lights of the car come to a stop through my rearview mirror, near where the girl was.
Evans pulled up beside Elizabeth.
She said, are you going to Dublin? And I said, we weren't going to Dublin, but we could still give her a lift. She got into front passenger seat.
Elizabeth's good friend, Mella, believes Elizabeth would not have gotten in the car that easily.
I know Liz. She would never have got into a car without knowing who they were. I know she wouldn't, because she was my friend, and we used to talk about things like that. We were always terrified of anything like that.
What happened next must have haunted David James MacDonald, because in his gut he knew something was off, and he turned to his friend sitting in the passenger seat.
I pulled in near the supermarket and said to my friend, should I go back and see if everything is all right? And my friend advised me to go home, as we might be sticking our noses into something that didn't concern us.
It was at this point that Evans went back up the road to get John Shaw.
He then picked me up. I sat in the back and the girl was in the front seat. She was wearing pants and a jumper with writing on it.
Back at McDaniel's pub, Elizabeth's friends couldn't find her anywhere and were all confused as to what was happening. Mary Ann Green, the woman who was waiting for her son to finish work, was sitting outside McDaniel's pub.
10 minutes after the girl passing, the people started to leave the pub. I remember a voice of a man calling Elizabeth about 4 times, but he was one of about 4 people. The thought ran through my mind that the girl who had passed down the steps earlier was the girl he was calling.
Elizabeth's friends were not going to find her, because by this stage, she was in the car with John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans.
She told us she'd had a row with her boyfriend.
We were talking about normal things for a while in the car, and then we started messing with the girl.
I find it really distressing to imagine what Elizabeth was going through now, as she must have been really beginning to panic.
She jumped out of the car and was struggling with John.
She started to scream in the car and we stuffed tissues into her mouth.
I drove along until I came to McDaniel's pub. I turned left there, drove along that road for a couple of miles, about, I'm not sure. I parked in an opening on left. It's an opening to wood. In a bit from the roadway there's a wire fence. Across this opening it's like a lane. The 3 of us then got out of the car.
When we got to woods, We dragged her out of the car. We climbed over a wire fence that was across the road there.
And then we all got over the wire fence. As we were walking down the lane, she got frightened. She didn't want to go down.
Meanwhile, Joe and his girlfriend Annette drove around the local area to see if they could spot Elizabeth.
Joe and I drove to Wicklow Rathnew and around by Jack White's Cross. In spite of searching for her that Saturday night, we failed to find Elizabeth.
After midnight, Mary Ann Green was driving home with her husband and son who had just finished work. They passed Castle Timon Woods, the place where the men had described bringing Elizabeth.
At about 12:45 a.m, when we drove home, we were passing by an opening into the plantation on the left-hand side of the road, about a mile from McDaniel's pub. A vehicle was in the opening. It was parked on the right-hand side of the opening with the back facing the road. The inside was lit up.
The following 24 hours of Elizabeth's life in those woods was horrible. The detail would only come to light through the Garda investigation over the following few months and years. But right now, in the early hours of the last Sunday in August in 1976, as Elizabeth's friends went to sleep in a caravan in Brittas Bay, and her family went to sleep in Ringsend, nobody knew where she was and what was happening to her. The next morning was a Sunday morning.
It's the part that never leaves my mind.
And at home in Ringsend, Elizabeth's then 14-year-old sister Kathleen was baking.
I was in the kitchen with my mum making Sunday dinner, and we always made apple tarts on a Sunday morning. You know, these routines that were set in stone with, you know, the jelly be'd made and the marifat peas would be steeping from the night before, and you'd be washing cabbage, and then while the oven was on, sure, you might as well throw in a few apple tarts.
So much of the detail in this series has never been publicly told before, including what was going on inside Elizabeth's family home.
There was a knock on the door, and I went out to answer the door, and this girl said, "Is Elizabeth there?" And I said, "No, she's gone away for the weekend." Thought no more of it, and I came back out to the kitchen. My ma said, "Who was that?" And I said, "Somebody looking for Liz." And immediately my ma's instinct, now that I look back on it, she walked out, and I remember trying to wipe her hands with flour, and she walked out to the hall door. She walked out onto the footpaths and said, "Who was that? Who was that? She's away with her friends. Who was that?" I said, "I don't know, some girl." And whoever it was had disappeared up the top of the street.
It later emerged it was Annette McLaughlin who knocked at the door. When Annette, along with Elizabeth's group of friends, woke up in Brittas Bay that Sunday morning and realised there was still no sign of Elizabeth, they all came back to Dublin, hoping they'd find her there.
Damien was in a car up the top of the street and had sent this young one down to see had Elizabeth made it home.
She wasn't there, so he really, you know, got very anxious and very upset.
At this stage, the Plunketts were totally oblivious to what was going on.
That was a Sunday morning, and we had our dinner, and she wasn't due back home. I went to, I don't know, the CY or Bective, whatever disco was on, I went on the Sunday night.
And Damien, in the meantime, was frantic. Where is she? So the thoughts of him, when eventually he did have to come to the house and say what had happened.
The fear of Elizabeth being missing was beginning to mount. Elizabeth's big sister Joan lived nearby with her husband Jimmy, and Damien had checked was Elizabeth there.
So I think they drove back up to Joan and Jimmy to say, "Look, Elizabeth's not in her mum's. She's not with you. We have a serious situation here." They both came down to the house and started to tell my mum, and Damien came in. He told her that they had a row and that Elizabeth said she was going home, and we've searched for her and we cannot find her.
Kathleen came back from her disco to find a panicked scene.
When I came home, the house was full. Joan and Jimmy were there. You could feel the tension in the house. But I remember, and I was saying, "What's wrong?" That Elizabeth's gone missing. And I'm like, "What?" And my mum being, I don't know whether it's mother instinct, but immediately she said, "Well, why wouldn't she be able to make her way home from Wicklow? This young one had been all around, like she knew her stuff, like there'd be nothing to stop her from getting from A to B." And my ma said, "Why, Elizabeth's dead, otherwise she'd be here." And we were all going, "Oh." But she just knew. And of course my dad was going mad, saying, "You can't be saying that." And she said, "I'm telling you."
It was less than 24 hours since Elizabeth had last been seen alive. But everyone who knew her, including her dad Tommy, knew this was not right.
My father said immediately, report her missing.
So Bernie and Damien went to the nearest Garda station, Irishtown.
There was one guard there, but they said she was over 21 and it hadn't been 24 hours. And we said, no, but she would not do that. She would never do that. She would never stay out and have us worried like this. So they said, well, come back. I think it was the following day before it would have been official.
While the local Gardaí said they couldn't do much about the case, Bernie and Damien knew there was no way that they could just leave it at that.
Damien was agitated. He couldn't have sat around. He couldn't have not gone back and see did she show up at the caravan or see did she show up at the pub. So honestly, I'd say we were there till it started to get dark. Okay. And then we would have come back to Dublin, back to the house, and people were waiting for her to see would she show up. We waited up all night.
The next morning was Monday, August 30th, 1976. Elizabeth had now been missing for about 36 hours.
The Monday came. That's the panic then. Yeah. And that's when Mum said, I'm going to look for my child. Yeah. She did go with my dad. We went over the dunes. I could see her walking around the dunes and looking in the grass and looking for any sign of her.
Elizabeth's two brothers, Eddie and Thomas, were living down in County Cork.
My brother Thomas and I were lobster fishermen out of Cove. That fateful phone call to say that Elizabeth is missing. Thomas and I jumped the car, drove to Dublin. It was only then that we realised that the chaos. Bernie told me that from the minute my mother got word, she said, problems. We didn't. We were going up to sort it out.
You felt you'd find her?
Yeah.
The glorious summer weather had turned, and it was now raining. Down in Wicklow, local Garda Nicky Crennan had heard about some strange behaviour in Brittas Bay.
There was a phone call from a guy called Alex Stone. He was the owner of McDonald's that time, and they also owned the caravan park opposite. He reported two guys down in the caravan park at an old dump. There was an old marl hole in the middle of the field, and we went out to check them out.
The two men Garda Nicky Crennan was about to meet were John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans, less than 24 hours after they had murdered Elizabeth.
We stayed in Brittas Bay that day, Monday. We went to a pit in the field behind the caravans.
There was a fire going there, men working.
The police came along, spoke to us.
So these two guys were there drying their clothes. It was wet the day before.
It got wet during heavy rain yesterday.
They told us to come from Tipperary.
We're on holidays.
And I remember they gave their names to me as John and Jeffrey Murphy from Burnskill, Feathered in County Tipperary. I wrote it in the back of a brown envelope I had in my pocket.
Garda Nicky Crennan and his colleague had no idea Shaw and Evans were actually burning some of Elizabeth's clothes.
John burnt the girl's slacks and t-shirt in a quarry in that field.
But something didn't feel right about these two men.
My colleague remarked to him when they told us they were John and Jeffrey Murphy, they were brothers.
We're brothers.
And he remarked to him, you don't look like brothers. And then he said,
step brothers.
Because one was small, and that was Evans. Small and, light little fella. The other guy, Shaw, was a big, rougher type, and I suppose you could say shifty now.
News of Elizabeth being officially missing hadn't yet emerged, and Nicky Crennan and his colleague weren't too concerned about the two men.
We found nothing, just took their address, their names. They were doing bugger all, only trespassing, and I suppose we told them they were private property, you shouldn't be here to get out of the place. They said they would. We left them there.
Shaw and Evans didn't leave immediately, though.
We stayed around the caravan park until sometime late that night or Tuesday morning.
On that night, Monday, we broke into about 5 caravans in the next field. We got a television, 1 record player, transistor radio, and a few shillings.
We then returned to Fetid.
Shaw and Evans left the area and headed back to the house they had stayed in previously, their friend Cliff Outram's house in Tipperary, near where I grew up in Feathered. Back in Dublin, Elizabeth was officially becoming a missing person.
It wasn't taken that serious for a few days, I think, but the family were all concerned, and her family were down here and her friends searching. I think that was going on for 3 or 4 days.
For the first week, all the searches were done. The civil defence were there. Elizabeth's colleagues in work were there. Everyone that was so helpful. The neighbours from Ringsend, looking for evidence, looking for anything that would help us find Elizabeth.
Elizabeth's family then got an appeal into the papers.
Evening Herald, Wednesday, 1st of September 1976. Family appeal to daughter. Elizabeth Plunkett of 24 Pembroke Cottages, Irish Town, went to Brittas Bay for the weekend and by early today still had not returned. She is of medium build, 5 feet 5 inches in height, has brown eyes and shoulder-length black hair.
I remember my dad's brother, Willie from Donnybrook. Him and his sons came.
This is Thomas, Elizabeth's younger brother, who had come up from Cork to search for her.
And we all met to go to Brittas and start searching for some clues. It was a strange atmosphere, you know. On the one hand, we're searching this place, and it's a beautiful place, Brittas. And then you're just hoping that you don't find anything, but on the other hand, you want to find something.
It's impossible to understand how Elizabeth's siblings were all now feeling, including her sister Bernie.
It's desperation, you feel, and you're confused, and you're like, no, where could she have gone? You can't just disappear off the face of the earth. Somebody has to know. So you're going and asking back into the pub in McDaniel's to say, did anybody see? Looking through the sand dunes, wherever we thought we could.
When days were moving, we thought there might have been a chance that she was still alive. We spent hours and hours from day till dusk looking. Quite a bit of a blur, to be very honest with you.
1 week after Elizabeth's disappearance, on Saturday, 4th of September, a large-scale methodical search by Gardaí took place, with everybody joining in.
The Garda pointed to a search area, and it was undergrowth and scrubs and rough terrain, rough land.
And then, the search party found something, near Castle Timon Woods, the location where a parked car had been seen in the hours after Elizabeth had walked out of McDaniel's pub in Brittas Bay. It was one of Elizabeth's friends, Joe McCoy, who made the discovery.
There is a laneway leading from the roadway into the forest. While searching around the area, I saw a bra hanging on the briars and a scarf.
Then another of the searchers found a shoe. They went back to Joe's girlfriend Annette to take a closer look at it.
I looked at the shoe and said, that's Liz's shoe. I'd no doubt about it.
Annette showed the shoe to Liz's good friend Mella.
God, I just held in my arms and I just said, oh, please, let her be alive, or let her, please let us find her.
Everyone's heart sank. They knew this was not good, and that most likely something bad had happened to Elizabeth.
I remember looking at the pair of shoes, and the worst thing, and this is really difficult for me to talk about, is when she was being dragged, the dirt was on the back of the heels of the shoe.
By now, Elizabeth's disappearance had become national news on both RTÉ TV and radio.
Gardaí at Wicklow, supported by detectives from Dublin Castle, have intensified their search for the Dublin girl Elizabeth Plunkett, who's been missing for 10 days. Clothing and shoes belonging to the girl were found about 2 miles from a public house outside Wicklow town. Today, Gardaí are using tracker dogs in the search and are systematically combing woods and fields in the area.
Elizabeth's shoe, her underwear, a silver watch her father had given her for her 21st birthday were all found, but not Elizabeth.
We never found her.
By now, Gardaí were talking to local people and holiday makers, and a picture was beginning to emerge.
I saw 2 people pass by. They had a dirty appearance and very suspicious.
I would describe one as stocky build, dirty appearance, overgrown black beard, wild.
I saw 2 men asleep near the dump in sleeping bags.
When I pulled up alongside my caravan, I noticed a strange car was parked beside it.
But what had happened to Elizabeth? And where was she now?
I went to look at my boat and discovered it was missing from its moorings.
The hut had been broken into by forcing the bolt off the door, I found a lawnmower missing.
And could Evans and Shaw be stopped from continuing to destroy lives?
Why Elizabeth? Why our sister?
If you've any further knowledge of the actions of John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans in Ireland, please email us at documentaries@rte.ie. Join us in our next episode as serial killers John Shaw and Jeffrey Evans remain at large in Ireland.
We were in Castle Bar one night. We saw a girl on the road walking along.
They were on the hunt again.
Mary was on the road at 11 o'clock, a lovely young 23-year-old after finishing her shift in a local cafe.
Stolen Sister is narrated by me, Roz Purcell. The music is by Oscar-winning composer Stephen Warbeck and performed by the RTE Concert Orchestra. Readings in this episode were by Hilary Bell, Cian Cleary Hand, Patrick Dunn, Shane Hartney, Jade Hill, Trevor Keegan, Kenny McGillifordrick and Jessica Phelan.
And sound design and orchestra recordings are by me, Kieran Dunn.
Production assistance is by me, Shauna McGreevy.
And the series is written and produced by me, Nicoline Greer.
The executive producer is Liam O'Brien. If you've been affected by any issues raised in this episode, please visit rte.ie/helplines. Until next time, thanks for listening.